Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Kambei Digital's Azure DevOps webinar, Best Practices and Benefits. We will start the session in about 3 minutes, just waiting for a few more people to join, and then we'll jump in. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We will get started in about 2 minutes. All righty, thank you everyone for joining. We are going to go ahead and start the webinar. Today's webinar is Azure DevOps, Best Practices and Benefits. Very excited about this webinar and the speakers that we've assembled through Kambei, Horizon, and Microsoft. Just before we get started, just a little bit about Kambei. We are a Microsoft 3 cloud partner. We focus on Azure, obviously DevOps. This is what the topic of the webinar is about. D365 and Microsoft 365 as well. We have over 1,300 global high performance consultants worldwide. We have 4 offices in India, 4 offices in the US, and 1 in Dubai. We're also have been awarded for 4 consecutive years the Inc. 500 fastest growing partners. We have about 35% growth annually, very viable and have a solid foundation. As I mentioned, we focus on the Microsoft 3 cloud stack, Azure, Dynamics 365, and M365. We also have an engineering team that focuses on the AI aspects, IoT, a healthcare team that focuses on workforce management, and then a team that focuses on staffing and recruiting as well. So again, we have 1,300 employees globally, and we are a Microsoft managed partner and focus all across the platform, and look forward to future discussions around the Azure DevOps piece, Dynamics 365 or M365 as well. Very excited about the speaker list that we put together. I mean, just can't thank the team enough. I mean, it's not every day that you're able to get industry leaders and experts like we have on the call today. First off, I'd like to introduce Steve. Steve has been with Microsoft for over 14 years. Funny tidbit about Steve, when he started, his first day was when TFS got launched. So he's been with TFS, Azure DevOps, since the ground up. He also led the developer experience for Microsoft and is on the Microsoft Azure DevOps team. So Steve, welcome and thank you for joining. We also have Eric from Horizon. Eric has over 26 years of IT experience. He's been at Horizon for over 15 years and has 10 years of business intelligence experience as well. So he is a thought leader, a trendsetter in the industry, and glad to have Eric on as well. In addition, from Horizons, we have Wendy, on the phone, who has 25 years of IT experience. She's been working with Horizons for about 23 years and been running the DevOps team for 15 years. So she's going to talk about lessons learned, best practices, and things of that nature. And then last but not least, we have Mr. Michael Busby. Michael has over 30 years of IT experience, 18 Microsoft certifications, and he leads the Kambei delivery team. He'll be talking about certain aspects around the product as well. So from an agenda perspective, this is where we're going. We're going to talk about the Horizons Azure DevOps journey, lessons learned. Eric's going to talk a little bit about Horizon, and then Wendy's going to dive into the process and the program that she followed. We're then going to hear from Steve. He's going to talk about all the cool things that Microsoft is doing around Azure DevOps, from recent acquisitions to new product and feature releases, and to all the bells and whistles to kind of give you a foundational understanding of how Microsoft is moving that innovation forward. Then we have Michael that's going to really talk about, best practices when deploying DevOps. We're going to hear about the Horizon journey. We're going to discuss what Microsoft's doing around digital transformation. Then we're going to talk about it from a delivery perspective. What are some tips and tricks? What are some prepackaged options? And then how do you move that strategy forward? Then at the end, we're going to have an open discussion. So Steve, Eric, Wendy, and Michael will list the questions. During the presentation, you should see a chat button. And if you have any questions that you want to ask the panelists at the end of the session, please enter them into that chat window. We will then at the end ask the questions and kind of go from there. We are expecting that the questions could go maybe 5-10 minutes over, because we do have a lot of content to go through. As a reminder, we'll cover this at the end. We also will be sending out a Azure DevOps white paper. We'll send out the recording of the webinar, and then we'll also send out some information regarding a free workshop that we have as well. So who's ready to get started? I know I am. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Eric. So Eric, the floor is yours, and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to meet with us. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of who we are, so you understand why we work with DevOps and have kind of inherited into our process. So Horizon, we've been around for over 30 years. We're a commercial software company. We make a software called a Laboratory Information Management System, or Laboratory Information System, LIMS or LIS, depending on whether you're in a hospital setting, you'll hear it as LIS. If you're in more of a toxicology or other lab setting, you'll hear it as LIMS. Same system, just they have different, different terminology in the settings. But the idea is that our commercial software really governs the operational workflow of a lab. So our software is kind of like the ERP for a lab. The idea is that we accept the orders from incoming, whether EMRs, EHRs, or just being ordered via a website. We then, at that point, take care of the business workflow that's supposed to happen to that sample that comes through the door. Whatever instrument it's supposed to go to, whatever scientist might need to certify the results, and then ultimately, at the end, deliver the result back to the client, patient, clinic, wherever it needs to go. So the idea that, behind our software is that it really is engineered to for the speed and accuracy of running a lab. So that really is what we do. We've been around 30 years, as you can imagine. Haven't been around that long. Our software has been through multiple iterations. Our parent company is a very interesting story as well. About 7 years ago, we were bought, and our parent company has been around for 160 years. They're called Domain, is their name. They own us. We're a standalone company. We're one of the ones that they're sole owner for us. But about 18 months ago, they transitioned themselves from a family, multi-general-based private company into a foundation. You can think of Newman's Own. Newman's Own is a foundation out there that they own. Their salad dressing company that generates profits, and then Newman's Own check their organization to various foundations. So we actually, instead of forming a nonprofit, Domain transitioned themselves into a nonprofit because there's some U.S. laws that changed and allowed that to happen back in early 2019. The interesting part about being owned by a nonprofit is Horizon is a for-profit company. Our profits just go to them, and they distribute those to at-stress communities. Domain's focus is on health and making the U.S. population society a better place. So being owned by a nonprofit, not only do we have to have an ROI, so a return on investment, but our parent company makes us have a SROI, a social return on investment. So the idea is that any dollar that invested in us, we hopefully in some way, shape, or form make the U.S. and community a better place. So it's a very interesting story. If you happen to have time, I'd highly recommend you Google Domain and look at their history. It's kind of cool. We were acquired by them about 7 years ago. It's a good acquisition for us. Now, as far as Horizon and where we play in pretty much 4 niche markets. 2 of them would be of ultra interest to almost, I'm assuming, everybody on the phone today. So we play in the agriculture market, food testing, stuff like that. The water quality and environmental market, you think of, you open your faucet, tap water. You have to have a lab that tests that water to make sure it's safe. So each city, state, municipality has a lab that does that. But the ones that would be most interesting today would be our public health labs. As you can imagine, they're the ones, at least some of them, are out there that are testing COVID cases in each state. So Horizon runs about 14 state public health labs and numerous city and municipality labs, as well as our tox and clinical labs are also getting into the COVID testing space. So we have one lab that is working their way up to 100,000 samples a day of COVID testing. So if you look at the left-hand side of your screen right now, those two types of labs that have Horizon are very pertinent to getting everyone back to work and safely. So that's the expertise that we play in. As you can imagine, go ahead to the next slide, Wendy. Because we've been around 30 years, we actually have, and almost every software company has to have multiple deployment models now. Our on-premise one is the one on the left-hand side. That's where it traditionally was, but as I said, everyone wants a cloud option. So we also now offer a PaaS and cloud solution. Obviously, they come with different functionality. It is our same software used across all 3 platforms. So that's just kind of how we're deployed. So now I'm actually going to turn this over to Wendy to tell you exactly how we use DevOps into our commercial development process.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So thanks for setting that stage there, Eric. He gave you a little bit of a picture of who we are, but to lend some context for how and why we use Azure DevOps, I just wanted to take a brief look back at the transformation of our software development lifecycle throughout our history. We were founded in 1987, originally by a developer who actually came out of a commercial lab. So in the early days, it was very much cowboy coding. If we had requirements, they came from hallway conversations, and maybe they got written down on a sticky note, if at all. Developers were very much responsible for their own unit testing. We didn't have any software QA analysts or testers on staff. We were using Microsoft Visual SourceSafe as a source code repository, but we had a homegrown bug tracker database that was a little bit of a joke. It was pretty rudimentary. So by the late 90s, it became pretty clear that we had to get our act together. As we grew, we had more and more customers who were highly regulated. We started dealing with new regulatory agencies, new to us anyway, including things like 21 CFR Part 11, the EPA Kramer rule, just all sorts of really stringent regulations around electronic records and specifically. So we moved more toward a waterfall method in the late 90s, where we had very elaborate, detailed specification documents. They sometimes took us a week or weeks to develop. we did add independent software QA to the staff around that time frame, and we formalized our QA process with some documented test plans and test cases, but they were still in Microsoft Word, and we stored both our design and our test documents out on file shares. Our source code was still in Microsoft Visual SourceSafe at that time, but we did also purchase a commercial bug tracker with some audit capabilities, and we tied that into our customer support process so we could have some traceability between what our customers were reporting and the bugs as they were going through the development process. So this worked for a while, but our releases were slow, and if we made any kind of mistake during the design phase, it was quite costly. So later in the 2010, around 2010, we really wanted to do an overhaul of our application front end. We wanted to move toward a true thin client browser-based application, which of course paved the way for some of the things Eric was just talking about with our cloud offering. So we knew we really had a monumental development task ahead, and that our waterfall process was just not going to work. It was going to be impractical, really just to try to rewrite a 20-plus-year-old application, which was largely built without any kind of written design, was just really a daunting task. So at this point, we transitioned to an agile scrum process, which really means a lot of different things to different people, but for us, it's really about the iteration and the collaboration. We really also had to rebuild our application in stages because we needed to continue to provide value for our customers who were paying maintenance. We couldn't just step away for 5 or more years and then come out with a brand new product. So really the concept of minimally viable product was helpful in letting us kind of break down our complex features. So user stories replaced elaborate specifications. At this point, we introduced Microsoft Team Foundation Server to us, and so we used that for all of our work item tracking, which included our user stories, our tasks, and our bugs as well. We replaced the Microsoft Visual SourceSafe that we were using with the integrated source code repository with TFS. This also gave us an integrated test case management tool. Although the testing features were a bit immature at the time with the early version of TFS, we did actually make use of that. During this time, our organization also began to invest in automated testing, and so we used TFS to track some of those efforts as well. So then flash forward ahead to 2019, as a development team, we found ourselves really totally reliant on TFS. TFS became the only true production system that was housed in our in-office local data center as we moved to things like Exchange, Office 365. Everything else was going to the cloud. So really TFS was the last true production environment that we were housing locally. We also had a near 24/7 uptime requirement because to do that rewrite of our entire application, we had augmented our staff with an offshore team. And so we really didn't have much room for downtime. TFS hadn't been upgraded, and it was very difficult to maintain. Our in-house IT resources really were largely unfamiliar with things like SQL Server, SharePoint, all of the different components of TFS. So all of those factors really led to a large amount of risk, frankly, that kept me up at night, and I know Eric as well. And when TFS went down, really our entire development staff was unable to work, including that offshore team. So this was a big deal for us. So as one of our primary initiatives for 2020, we really wanted to reduce that risk and move really this super critical system out of our on-site data center and off the plates of our local IT staff, almost more importantly. So this is when we brought Kambei on board to help, and really there was no way that we were going to try to do this on our own. We'd done some research and read some horror stories of various migration tools, and we really didn't want to lose our history and all of our user stories and everything that we had built into TFS. So we kind of quickly understood early on that a phased approach would be necessary. So the first step would be to upgrade. We were on TFS 2013 at the time, and so we needed to upgrade that to DevOps Server 2019 on-premise first, and then as the next phase, migrate that on-prem DevOps Server 2019 to Azure DevOps in the cloud. So with Kambei as our partner, we did a milestone-based rollout plan, and this actually occurred over the course of approximately 3 months. We did trial runs at each phase. So that during a trial run, we would set up a staging environment, and then the development team would execute a UAT against that stage environment. And also all of our production migrations took place over the weekend. So really our development team pretty much experienced close to no downtime, and our release cycle was actually unaffected, with a small caveat that we did build in a little bit of time for some of our key developers to do that UAT. But overall, it was basically no downtime during that project. So we got out of the migration project exactly what we had hoped, which was reduce risk and burden on our internal IT staff. However, there were actually a lot of surprises that came with upgrading, happy surprises. During a similar time frame, our company underwent our first SOC 2 compliance audit, and we found that TFS and DevOps is able to provide us good traceable evidence for our development processes. This SOC 2 compliance is really important, particularly for our cloud customers, and it's actually a differentiator in our particular industry. So we really enjoyed how DevOps, or originally TFS and then DevOps, really played into that process. We are also very happy to find that the testing features in DevOps had matured significantly since that 2013 version we were using. Now it includes integrated progress reporting, and you can assign and, more importantly, unassign testers to each test case as you're going through your processes, so you can reuse your test plans and clear out the testers the next time you run them. You can also reorder your test cases, which was helpful for us so you could specify a different order. Also, you can transition between work item types. So we would have cases where an item would be logged as a bug, but really the solution turned out to be a new feature. So in the old version, we had to relog that, but now we just can transition it to a user story. DevOps also allows for multiple dashboards, which has increased our visibility quite a bit, and it's actually made us rethink the way that we have some of our projects organized. So it's making it a lot easier for us to transition between different phases of our release cycle as well, because we use different dashboards when we're sprinting versus when we're doing regression testing or user acceptance testing and so forth. We also were happy to find an integrated wiki. Didn't expect that, but previously we've been maintaining a completely separate wiki server. So during the first 30 days, since we went live with Azure DevOps, which it was actually over Easter weekend, we began to make changes to our processes to take advantage of some of these features. So we started pulling out pieces of our customized workflow templates because we found that was not allowing us to take advantage of some of the boards and backlogs features of DevOps. So we've started taking that out. We also started reorganizing our project structure. I mentioned that some of the things like the multiple dashboards and the way that the user stories are organized really made us kind of rethink the way that we had our projects. So we changed the way we're using teams versus areas and iterations, really kind of split up our releases a little bit better. We also flattened our story hierarchy to be more like epics and then stories and then tasks. Previously, we had some stories that were children of other stories, which was also kind of standing in the way of utilizing some of the boards and backlogs features. And like I mentioned before, we started implementing the wiki. So really within the next 90 to 120 days, we plan to continue this effort, and we're going to continue to remove our customized workflow because we're finding we frankly don't really need it anymore with a lot of the newer features, so that we really want to take full advantage of the boards and backlogs. And so we also want to consolidate our projects so we just frankly have less to maintain, and also so that we can organize our work a lot more efficiently within DevOps. And we'll be retiring that separate wiki environment that I mentioned. We've got a bit more content to migrate over, but once we do that, we'll be able to get rid of a whole nother server in our environment. And that's all I had. So I think at this point, I'll be turning it over to my colleague, Steve.
Awesome, thank you. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay, great. So thank you for that, Wendy. My name is Steve Lang. I'm an Azure App Dev specialist at Microsoft. I work in our healthcare division. I cover the Western United States. So part of the things I cover are, among other things, obviously our DevOps solutions, which I'll be talking to you all about today. but also all of our cloud native app dev services that we have in Azure. So following this call, if anybody has any questions about that, I'm happy to follow up with you, EB. So the things I'm going to cover in my little bit of time today, get my slides to advance here, are a couple of things. We're going to talk about the what and why of DevOps. I think if you're here, you probably have some understanding of why DevOps is important today. I'm just going to briefly touch upon some of those topics. And that kind of bleeds into where Microsoft has been investing in our DevOps solutions. So you'll see, I'm going to talk about sort of an end-to-end overview of what Azure DevOps Services is. And then we're going to wrap up by talking a little about GitHub. Microsoft acquired GitHub a couple of years ago. And so I thought I'd bring you up to speed and kind of where we are with that journey as well. All right. So you've probably have experienced somewhere in your life the need to balance speed and control, either personally or professionally. In today's cloud-based world, the traditional methods of delivering and operating software need rethinking. With the speed of the cloud, a business needs to be able to move fast and innovate or pretty much be left behind. However, a lot of tools and processes have not really caught up to that need for speed, if you will, because of the need for control. Because of the manual nature of deployments and siloed org structures, processes, and tools, human error is inevitably introduced, which is going to lead to things like higher failure rates when changes are implemented and long times to recover from those failures and potential outages. And so what's more, in an effort to improve reliability in these situations, historically, we just implement further controls via more manual processes, approval gates, etc. And all this does is extend lead times for changes and decrease deployment frequency, kind of going against the grain of this need for increased productivity and accelerated innovation. Now, if you're on this call, you probably do understand that in the cloud-driven world, developers are pretty much at the heart of your company's future innovation endeavors, right? So from those very first lines of code that they start writing from an idea on a cocktail napkin somewhere, how do you give your developers the best tools to unleash their capabilities and make them more productive? Productivity, you'll see, does not come just from great tools, which is, we're talking about that a lot today, at least in my section, but you also need to facilitate collaboration and code reuse across teams, because these ideas help accelerate problem solving and focus efforts on solving new problems important to your business versus doing those that have already been solved by others in the past. So in short, it's not just tools, even though I'm talking about them a little bit, but people and processes that are needed to speed up that innovation. So how do we tackle this? Well, if you join this webinar, you probably know the answer. It's DevOps. DevOps allows us to accelerate delivery while still delivering reliable products and services. It's about bringing together people through shared common goals, increased collaboration, focus on improvement, so more of a growth mindset. Technology also plays a key role in helping to execute a DevOps strategy by enabling teams to collaborate more, increase productivity, etc. And it's also about delivering value faster by increasing efficiency, eliminating waste, and streamlining feedback to developers to continuously improve the product. So ideally, the result is better products delivered faster, happier customers. DevOps as a term or as a definition is highly overloaded in the industry. So just to give you an idea of kind of where Microsoft comes from, this is our definition of DevOps: it's the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end customers. So if you look back at the State of DevOps report from 2018 presented by Dora, the top performing DevOps companies, when compared to lowering performers, they spend on average 66% less time on customer support issues and 50% less time on customer identified defects and the remediation of security issues. So if you take the converse of that, what that means is, more importantly, they get to spend 66% more time on new work, therefore are more innovative. They spend more time innovating and less time just keeping the lights on, which enables them to be more adaptive in their markets, adaptive to their needs, and more able to delight their customers. So in a short bit, you'll hear from the Kambei folks talk about more about DevOps best practices and guiding principles. For now, let's look at one key practice I'm going to show you in a second, adopted by highly functioning DevOps performers. And we'll see how that bleeds into how Microsoft has invested in what areas in our DevOps journey. So keeping in mind that the definition of DevOps includes people, processes, and tooling, one of the biggest ideas here is weaving in operational excellence into the lifecycle as early as possible. If you've been in the industry for a while, you know operations is typically an afterthought, more on the post-deployment side of things, and we call that reactive operations. So when an app is deployed, it's historically just thrown over the wall to ops to then secure, scale, and govern. Operations teams, they also usually use their own processes and tools separate to development teams. So if an org needs to redesign an application for resiliency, security, governance, et cetera, for an already deployed app, it's very costly and very time consuming. It's kind of like trying to turn the Titanic instead of turning a speedboat. This means that that really only best effort measures are put into place to enable the application to finally go live, which is a potentially risky thing to the business. And unfortunately, in the event of an actual outage, this leaves little or no time to react to issues. So part of enacting a good DevOps practice supported by good tooling is moving to more proactive. So enabling operational best practices to be proactively implemented early in the life cycle. So you can use things like policy-driven governance services and leveraging modern practices such as defining your policies in code, infrastructure as code, et cetera. You can shift those operational best practices such as resiliency, security, monitoring, et cetera. You can shift those left to much earlier in the development cycle. I mean, this will allow you to provide developers with the tools to design apps with resiliency in mind, providing them with continuous monitoring for immediate detection, all the way from dev to test, ultimately to prod. And also then by putting things such as compliance, security, and resiliency right into the develop phase, you can now then help to detect security vulnerabilities, implement governance, and define risks even before deployment. Now, because we're defining these operational policies now as code, just as we do with our application code, with our operational code, we can now take advantage of the same development, collaboration, and delivery benefits using DevOps tooling. This ideally means less issues post-deployment, which results in less downtime and more reliable products. And that is the operational side and goal of a high-performing DevOps team. So now let's do our own little shift and take a look at what solutions Microsoft currently provides for these high-performing DevOps teams. We're first going to take a look at Azure DevOps, which is Microsoft's flagship DevOps solution. The tools initially released, as Wendy was talking about previously, the tools initially released as Team Foundation Server back in late 05, early 06. Over the years, it's grown into a well-rounded, fully functional, enterprise-grade DevOps platform. As you also heard in the previous section, TFS has evolved into what's called now Azure DevOps Server as of the 2019 release, while Azure DevOps Services now provides a robust cloud-hosted DevOps solution. So we don't just make things like this to sell to our customers, we also use them ourselves inside of Microsoft. So we quite literally eat our own dog food. We actually use Azure DevOps today to deploy Azure DevOps and build and deploy all the other larger products at Microsoft, from Windows, Office, Teams, and even Minecraft. So as you can see, we have over 100,000 users daily on Azure DevOps, doing millions of builds per month and over 82,000 deployments per day to various services, whether that be the on-prem products or cloud-based deployments. So having said that, let's take a couple minutes and highlight some of the overall, I'll say the all key components of Azure DevOps. So if I was to try to encapsulate all of what Azure DevOps can do in a nutshell, here's all of its moving parts. And I'm going to go through each one of these in just a moment, but just to briefly touch upon them in case you're dropping off early. We have Azure Boards to allow you to do what we call agile project planning and management. You have Azure repos for all of your source code repository work, Azure pipelines for your CI/CD work, continuous integration, continuous delivery. We use Azure test plans now for advanced test case management and planned and unplanned manual testing. And also we round it out with Azure Artifacts for, think of as managing your package feeds and managing your overall packages going into your pipelines. Let's double click on each of these just for a second here. First, Azure boards. As I mentioned, this is where you can track all of your work from an agile planning and management perspective. We have Kanban boards, we have task boards, all of which are touch sensitive, all of which are very customizable. You have team and project level dashboards, custom reporting. You can connect all these to, say, Power BI for larger decision-based reports and dashboards. Really anything you need to track your actual work throughout some kind of life cycle. From there, we have Azure repos. Which is we support two different types of code-based repositories or source control providers. One, which is the more popular, is the Git-based repos, so your distributed version control system. And we also still provide and support the classic TFVC or Team Foundation version control model that was in the original version of TFS all those years ago to act as a centralized version control repository. Git inside of Azure repos is not a Microsoft flavor of Git. I like to joke it's not MS Git. It's actually the open source Git libraries baked right in. So any client, any utility, any tooling you're using today against any other Git repo will work inside of Azure repos. And lastly, we also additionally have Azure pipelines, and this is where you can take advantage of both cloud-hosted and on-premise pipelines for deploying to basically any type of platform, any cloud if you like. We support any major provider cloud, and using any language as well. This is completely extensible. There's really not much that Azure pipelines cannot do. We also have support for deploying to all different types of containers, leveraging other open source technologies if you need to integrate, and we allow you to do multiple things in parallel as well. And to give you a flavor for all the things that pipelines can do, oops, clicked a little too fast there, my apologies. You'll see here's just a sampling of some of the things that Azure pipelines can do out of the box. It can build, test, transform, verify, package, deploy, and report on your projects. I'm taking an extra little pause here on Azure pipelines because your CI/CD pipeline is really the bridge between your development teams and your operations teams. A mature deployment pipeline doesn't just throw code over the wall, like I was joking about earlier. It manages the process. It handles your approvals. It reports on your progress, and it ensures the consistency and has transparency in your project. So your pipeline is essentially the heartbeat of your project. So it's an important thing to try to implement as you're trying to mature or grow a DevOps practice in your organization. Next thing I'll talk about briefly is Azure test plans. And Wendy mentioned this a little bit as well. This is something that has made great leaps and bounds in terms of growth over the past decade or so. Azure test plans is for all of your planned and unplanned manual testing efforts. So this could be anywhere from exploratory testing to executing test cases, capturing data through all different types of test progress. It's also providing feedback as well. It's a great tool to leverage, and it's integrated with the rest of the life cycle to allow you to quickly understand what kind of requirements test coverage you have, what tests are passing and failing over time, doing test impact analysis, etc. And last but not least, we have Azure Artifacts. Azure Artifacts is basically is a way of managing your package feeds from public and private sources. Integrates directly into pipelines, allows you to control which package versions you might want to leverage when building your products in Azure pipelines. Allows you then to take your own packages as well, and as you build these sort of components for your organization to use, you can throw them in Azure Artifacts too, and they become instantly available as managed packages, as version packages for the rest of your teams. So we just run through a very high level. I usually can do that in about 2 or 3 hours, but we've run through an overall solution and how this addresses the main 5 areas across plan, develop, collaborate, deliver, and operate. How you can enable you to innovate at scale and deliver with more confidence. So we talked about Azure boards to plan. You can use your IDEs as well for development for maximum developer efficiency. Azure DevOps, or excuse me, Azure repos for collaboration and source control. Pipelines, test plans, and artifacts to help accelerate the overall delivery of your products. And lastly, things like Azure security and management services to help your products remain reliable, scalable, and secure. Now, while you see these tools obviously integrate and work very well together, they're also modular in the sense that you can integrate and bring in any other types of tools that you like to use. So Azure DevOps is fully extensible with APIs and webhooks to integrate with existing tools. We know you probably have investments in other certain areas such as maybe Jenkins, Terraform, Ansible, etc. So we provide integration points, if not actual integrations provided by those third parties or us, to help you plug in those tools into your DevOps lifecycle. And we also do provide a lot of guidance and documentation to help you get started. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about in my little bit of time is GitHub. So as you know, or you may not know, in late 2018, Microsoft acquired GitHub. GitHub is currently the largest developer platform in the world with over 55 active users, 55 million active users. Don't want to forget the word million there. So now we have Azure DevOps, which has been incredibly successful. It empowers thousands of our customers with over the past 15 years of innovation on that product. It's been a really good sweet spot for us in the enterprise. Now we're taking it and bringing it together with GitHub, which is the home for open source and those 55 million plus users. So how are we going to accomplish that? Those are two very large products, two somewhat overlapping products. So the first thing we had to do was get on the same page with a shared engineering team. So we brought the two engineering teams together. So now Azure DevOps and GitHub have the same leadership. We're also making sure that the engineers who are responsible for the platform, both Azure DevOps or GitHub, they own the code that it's running in production. So we get to bring all the insights and the lessons we've learned over the past 15 years with Azure DevOps to the sort of the social popularity, if you will, of GitHub. So what you're going to beginning to see is the marriage of what's the best of what each of these solution offers over the next 12 to 18 months. Right, so GitHub allows you to collaborate with open source and inner source. So you know, we're almost 99% of all software projects include some kind of open source. So you can use GitHub to also enable open source culture and enact best practices inside your organization. Things like that you'll see are really kind of helping this software supply chain is GitHub Advanced Security, which allows you to automatically protects all the code that you're deploying, not just the 10 and 20% your team's writing. It's currently analyzed and secured over 135,000 open source projects to date, which makes your projects that much more secure. If it does find a known vulnerability, it automatically creates a pull request if it can find the resolution to the known vulnerability and puts it in your GitHub repo. So this takes us back to that shift left approach I mentioned earlier, in that the security and compliance can be baked as a developer-focused responsibility and not just a post-deployment operational one. So wrapping up, to sort of embrace DevOps and innovate at scale, Microsoft is investing heavily in both GitHub and Azure DevOps. So for GitHub to accelerate your collaboration, open source development practices, developer efficiency, and socialization, Azure DevOps to wrap around GitHub to accelerate delivery of your products. And then lastly, Azure Security Management Services for reliability, scalability, and security. And so now we've effectively, thank you for your time, we've come full circle. So this is the true definition of DevOps at Microsoft, the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end users. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention and time and hope you found it worthwhile. Thanks everybody. And with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you. I think we've all seen how a client can use it, and from Microsoft, all the great technology and things that are out there and to come. Yep. Wow, that was some great information and great content. Thank you, everyone. Would like to now kind of cover over some other details. You know, that I think they've pretty much covered, you know, DevOps, what it is, and part of the journey. It's, you know, continuous integration, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and continuous operations. And, you know, what we've kind of heard is, you know, what are those benefits that we're getting? You know, the increased, you know, frequency, of quality, of deployment and release, improved innovation. I think that's one of the parts. You know, we talk about solving problems. We don't solve it with always with technology. It's bringing people in where these tools are going to help them innovate and free up their time to do these things, which then that also mitigates risk. Definitely faster time to market, which is critical. Not only getting it out there, but getting the enhancements and improving. The market's moving so fast and trying to keep up with it. You saw all the quality tools. So not only starting with the development, but the boards and keeping track of the progress all the way through. And then the testing plans, and then finally automating the deployment. It takes out the human part where we forget to make a click someplace in the deployment. Definitely improves all that quality and reliability in the systems. And then the mean time to recovery. So if something were to go wrong, it gives us a much faster way to recover from our processes. So it gives us a disaster recovery. Everything that any project and any company that's moving forward should be considering. So these are some great benefits that come out of DevOps just by implementing it and then taking it. It's a journey. And one of the things that you have to go through is it becomes a mindset. It's typically developers have had one mindset. They go talk to the subject matter experts, and then they kind of get this detail. They go in this black box and build it, and then all of a sudden they turn it over. This new approach, it's people, process, automation. How do we make this mind shift change where we can bring, items closer into the development, bring the operations in there so that there's no gotchas as you're going down through. So DevOps has some great tools, but it's also a mind shift that we have to kind of be thinking that we're bringing the development and operations together sooner to be able to deliver. And it's giving us the tools to automate many of the processes behind the scenes and everything else. So it's achieving one common goal with a value based on the delivery model. It's everybody working together to get to the final solution for our journey. And this is a journey that you're going down through. This journey starts with maturity levels. Again, you saw from Horizon, it started off as Kambei code, then it went up to waterfall, then it moved up into Agile, and then finally it moved into TFS and DevOps. It's a maturity. So as it's maturing, we have to get the fundamentals in there. The what, the whys, getting the teams working together, ensuring we have governance. Then you're stepping into the next part is how am I going to bring in the continuous integration, continuous development, and what tools to use. The plethora of tools out there is just mind-boggling. You saw that. Which one of those tools works in each one of those spots? Each one, you've got to find the one that works best for you. And then containerizing your solution and automatically, being able to register, creating containers for the code to get reuse and things like that. And then finally, infrastructure as a code. What you're looking at is that maturity. You've got to work your way down through each one of these and define them as you're growing. As you saw, the first part of making the decision to change over, then you probably want to stand up a POC and things like this. So it's a journey. As you saw, the first 30 days, then the next 90 to 120, and then there'll be the 120 and beyond. So this is a definite journey. And as you're going through that journey, you're maturing and your processes are getting tighter and better. So what are some of the best practices? So the first part is what we're kind of talking about is there needs to be organizational alignment. If your organization isn't in alignment, it makes it very hard to move forward if everyone's going in different directions. Center of excellence, basically finding that champion inside of the company that's going to lead you down through this path of getting into DevOps. The governance, you kind of have to set up that committee. Starts with the executives going down. Then it's education. How do we get the people informed of what DevOps is, what it's going to take, and the value, the benefits we're going to get out of it. And then standing up a pilot and evaluating the results, and then roll out an adoption. So that's step one. Step two is the things that are coming out of DevOps is it's eliminating these communication gaps. So as you're going into the pilot, you're going to start seeing this. You're going to see continuous feedback coming because you've got the DevOps, you've got the boards. People are reporting much more quickly, and you're seeing the results. You're seeing the feedback. You get the automated testing, you get the results back, and you can work with all those results in any kind of different ways and slice and dice that data. You get the right tool sets and the right resources pulled together on projects. Again, you saw the large number of tool sets, and you can have more than one and use the right tool set for the right project. And now you've got identification of your resources out there so that you can pair them up with the right projects. And now you can monitor the performance. That's always kind of coming in as a consultant. We're always interested in monitoring our performance. How are we performing? Are we meeting our timelines? Are we meeting not only from a delivery perspective, but from a report, information gathering, testing? How are we performing based upon the client's expectations? And this allows open and transparent information to come out through the reporting means. Finally, step 3, what are the best benefits that you're getting out of it? It's digital transformation. It leads you, guides you, and pushes you into that digital transformation. Resource utilization. You sit up there and go, I've got these developers, what projects are they working on? How much time do they have available? That's always kind of that challenge out there to make sure that you're utilizing all your resources to the optimization and making sure you're getting resources with the right skill sets. Minimize time to market. Again, this is not waiting until the very end to be able to release stuff. You're able to start working down through. Everyone kind of gets to see, because the developers and the operations are working together and developing this solution, which allows you to release it a lot quicker. Streamlined IT. With the waterfall and all the stand-ups and reporting and trying to get all the documentation put together, what happens and all the different tools. Now you're pulling the tools into one. You've got everyone making the updates into one place. There's not duplication of work, and great tools, automation to do continuous integration, continuous development. That's what DevOps kind of brings into it. And it's a cultural transformation. It's not this developer going off in this black box and somebody in the background asking the developer, well, how far along are you? 10% done. Next week, you ask them again, I'm 20% done. You're not seeing the progress. You're not getting to actually work with it and all those things. So it's a huge cultural transformation. It's bringing the people together, and instead of shifting everything towards the end of the project and having all your risk at the end of the project, it's balancing that risk out across the entire project and keeping everybody informed that they can see the progress and they're working hand in hand all the way through. So at the end, you end up with a much better product than if someone was off developing it and then showed it at the end. Enhanced communication. Everyone's got access to the DevOps tools. It's got Kanban boards. It's got multiple ways of reporting that data. So it's going to allow everyone to see the information, the task, who's working on them, if anything's falling behind, and be able to pull some nice reporting out of it. So it benefits that are critical in today's society. And improved collaboration. Again, it ties back to that cultural piece. They're collaborating from the beginning, not at the very end. It's a collaboration all the way throughout the project. So what are you guys waiting for? DevOps, I think, is the tool that ties and brings everything together for most businesses and leads that way to that digital transformation. Greg, turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate it. And Steve, Wendy, Eric, amazing content, thought leadership, and great guidance for all the participants on the webinar today. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is it is a journey, right? So it's not like you have to deploy everything at one time. you have the opportunity to phase these out. So as you start moving through the journey, start prioritizing, the important components, the sequence, and then identify counter dependencies, so that you can right size the deployment for you. And here's just an illustrative example, for a starter, runner, and cross-country type deployment. We have, we have a lot of customers that start, just with, phase one, and they'll just do some of the minor components. And then we have other ones that just want to do a cross-country journey and get it deployed as quickly as we can. The good thing is you have options. So again, reach out to us. We can kind of help you think through the approach and which of these approaches would be most relevant to your needs as well. In addition, I did want to kind of talk about, as we end, we're getting ready to get into the Q&A piece, but as a follow-up, this video and event was recorded. So we will send this recording out to everyone that registered and attended. In addition, we will send a copy of the deck so that you will have the deck available for distribution as needed. In addition, we've put together a white paper that kind of summarizes the webinar around best practices. We're going to send that out to everyone as well, and then we'll get that out to you next week. In addition, if you have any questions, please reach out to Alan Scott at kambeidigital.com. His phone number is right there, and we are offering up a 2-hour DevOps analysis and workshop. So if anybody has questions outside the webinar today, do not hesitate to reach out. We'll be sure to get back very quickly as well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get to the Q&A piece. So we have some really good questions in there. I'm going to start just answering, or not answering these, but distributing these out. The first one is, can you please give some example of project structure and reorganizing and consolidation that you did for your particular program? Wendy, that sounds like it's geared more towards you. Can you just talk about how you reorganize project structures and consolidated certain components based upon your program experience?
Sure. Yeah, so we had our original TFS deployment, we had separate projects for each of our main product lines. So Horizon Limbs is our main product, but we have a couple of separate modules. For example, our online portal, our mobile app, those were each in separate projects. So they had their own source code, their own work items, and their own bugs, and all of that was tracked separately. In addition, within our projects, each of our projects, we had set up the teams and then the area paths and iterations. And for us, we had the area path set to be each individual release. And then within that, obviously, the iterations are our sprints. What we're doing, part of what we're doing now is consolidating those projects. So we're pulling in the separate, so we're kind of basically eliminating the separate projects for our portal piece and our mobile app and all of that, and really consolidating it under, because we're able to do multiple dashboards and things like a consolidated backlog that we can branch out, and we're kind of re-implementing the teams to match more of those individual modules instead of being a one-to-one with our releases.
Good.
Hope that answers the question.
Oh yeah, perfectly. Well done. The other question we have is on a Scrum team, if developers need to shift left and develop infrastructure as a code, what offerings do you provide? At Kambei, we provide personal instruction, training, and can help you think through those optimized processes. What we'll do is we'll reach out to you one-off based upon that question, because I do have some questions around the shift left comment, but we'll get back to you very quickly on that. All right, so Steve, question for you. What are the biggest areas in innovation that you see Microsoft doing around DevOps? Where do you see kind of the future going with the platform?
Great question. I think a lot of it does come around back to that shift left, where it's taking as much of the operational aspects, which no knock on operationals guys, but that's one of the traditional areas that deployments get slowed down, is when a development team builds out their project, their application, and then gets ready to deploy, and that's when security or IT has to pump the brakes and do all their analysis and whatnot. So we're investing a lot in moving a lot of that security, compliance, governance to much earlier in the life cycle. And so that's where you're seeing things, especially say on the DevOps, Azure DevOps side of things, in Azure Pipelines, which is our CI/CD management system inside of Azure DevOps. We're seeing the ability to run Azure compliance checks. So if you're, say, deploying a web app or a series of VMs or a Kubernetes cluster out to Azure, you can actually run Azure policy compliance checks as part of that CI/CD process to validate whether or not it's actually going to a valid environment or to a trusted environment. And then on the GitHub side of things, as I mentioned, these things are slowly coming together, so we'll have best of both worlds in the future. But the innovations you're seeing on the GitHub side of things, as I mentioned, is like the GitHub Advanced Security, and being able to check for security vulnerabilities and approve package versions and things like that at commit time of the code, and not waiting for even a pipeline to kick off or a build to kick off. So that's where you're seeing a lot of the investment coming today, as well as being able to continue to support all the new platforms and services that are coming out, not just in the Azure cloud, but all the other major clouds around the industry.
Thank you for that, Steve. Great answer. Exciting what Microsoft is doing and how fast Azure DevOps is innovating. Michael, question for you. What are some of the best practices that you see as an implementer, and what recommendations would you have for people looking to deploy?
Yes. We're kind of running into those questions from the clients, but we've also ran into some of this internally. We've had a practice that's kind of been running more of that agile Scrum methodology, and recently we moved them over into DevOps, and it's definitely been allowing the team to collaborate and work a lot better together. And those have been kind of the key elements so far going down with it. The big part right now is they've been using the repo is probably the biggest thing, and getting to GitHub. So as people are starting their journey, the boards are all very critical, and getting that repository set up to ensure your code is safe, checked in, and the teams can all work and collaborate. I think, from a journey perspective, that's one of the key elements that I see that most customers are looking at, and probably from a maturity level, the first step in moving into the DevOps world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just like Microsoft, we use all the Microsoft stack. We eat our own dog food as well. So thank you for answering that. So Wendy, we got time for one more question. I'm going to ask you and pick on you one more time. The question is, when you kind of started putting your team together to deploy, what type of team members were required? What roles were required on your side to deploy this?
To deploy our application, or for the project?
The DevOps piece for the project. Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so our team is made up of, first of all, we're a small company. There's only 10 people on our development team, and then that offshore team that I mentioned earlier was an additional 6 members of that team. But our team roles are, we have a business analyst who is responsible for our designs and our user stories. We have an architect. We have a UX designer who works hand in hand with the business analyst. We have our developers, we have our QA, and we have our technical documentation lead. And then I also function as more of like the project manager or Scrum master, if you will, from that perspective. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does, and,
okay.
And thanks for that. And it just seems like there was a lot of change that you were pushing through all at one time. So well done, well done in sequencing the deployment and then kind of getting all the teams aligned. I think that was, the one of the areas of your success. So one thing I want to remind everyone as we kind of conclude the webinar is you move into these programs, you have to think of it as a balanced approach. People, process, automation. If you just focus on one, then you'll have an unbalanced triangle, and then you'll have quality issues. So, there's a lot of things outside technology that I think, Wendy, Steve, and Michael discussed today. It's the softer side of the equation that will get in the way. So as we conclude, as you guys have any, gals have any questions, feel free to reach out to Alan. We do have the 2-hour analysis and workshop. We are going to send out the free DevOps white paper next week based on these topics. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the recording, the deck, and the white paper will be bundled up and sent to you sometime next week. So with that said, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining Kambei Digital today. And if you have any questions, reach out. And this concludes the webinar. Thank you very much.